In the mid-1940s, the greatest fear of the French came true. The German army set out to conquer Europe, began a sweeping march to the west and entered French territory. French troops put up a fight, but it soon became clear that they were no threat to Adolf Hitler's powerful Wehrmacht. After 6 weeks of fighting, the Germans were victorious and occupied France. French citizens couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the Nazi flag waving on top of the Eiffel Tower, the country's greatest symbol. The same thing happened in the Palace of Versailles, which had been the residence of the French kings. At that time, no one could have imagined how much things would change from that moment on and the terrible suffering that would take over the country. The Gauls were about to know true terror. But before we continue, we are very happy to tell you that this video is sponsored by Aura, an incredible tool that will help you protect all your data on the internet. It is not news that all our information is available to anyone on the internet, and that happens because there are brokers that are in charge of compiling all your information and selling it to other companies or people who request it to offer you something, spam you, or for even worse reasons. Aura will identify these brokers and remove all your private information. It will even remove you from spam and robocall lists. Aura also monitors your emails and passwords to see if they were involved in a data breach and exposed on the dark web and gives you recommendations on what to do. Plus, it has a VPN, password manager, credit monitoring, and just about every internet security tool you'll ever need, all in one app. You can register using my code, aura.com/militaryhistory, or by scanning the QR on the screen, and try the application for 2 weeks, completely free of charge. Check how many brokers share your information and don't wait any longer to protect it. You can thank me later. I'll leave the links for you in the description and in the comments. And now, let's continue with today's video. The Germans invaded France in May 1940, smashing through its defenses and entering Paris on June 14 of that same year. The French government had no choice but to sign an armistice, according to which large areas of the north and west would remain in the hands of the Third Reich. Meanwhile, the civil administration of the French Third Republic was dissolved, and in its place the Vichy state was formed, that is, a national regime sympathetic to fascism and willing to collaborate with the Nazis. The leader of the new government was Marshal Philippe Pétain, a soldier respected for his heroic performance at the Battle of Verdun in World War I. However, at that time Pétain was an old man in his 80s, so in practice the person in charge of running the country was Pierre Laval, a former socialist who had good relations with the Germans. It is estimated that there were 25 million people living in the regions of France occupied by the Third Reich. Their life changed drastically, first of all, because they had to get used to seeing the Nazis walking around as if they were in their country. Tanks and armored vehicles of the conquerors roamed the semi-deserted streets, the Nazi flag proudly flew on public buildings, and banners and signs written in German were posted everywhere. The French were aware that they had completely lost their autonomy, and that a foreign invader now ruled. The German Army of Occupation carried out an intense propaganda campaign aimed at cleaning up the image of the Nazis and portraying them as friendly neighbors who were waging a just war. The intended message was that once Hitler defeated the Allies, a new political order would be established in Europe, and France would be one of its main pillars. According to the propaganda, the Gallic nation could make significant contributions considering its rich culture. However, this was far from the truth, as the French suffered a deep psychological shock from the invasion and learned to hate the Nazis. The inhabitants of the German occupation zones had to take charge of feeding and housing the 300,000 soldiers of the Wehrmacht. At the same time, the Germans had a free hand to confiscate and requisition French properties, so an organized looting system was formed. As a result, food shortages were not long in coming, with the consequent malnutrition of large sectors of the population, particularly children and the elderly. The French government had to enact laws to ration food. Shops could deliver a limited amount of goods to people, and endless lines of people were everywhere, waiting their turn to buy some bread, meat, and milk. Each citizen was given a ticket with which they could withdraw their daily ration, which was very little and not enough to satisfy the hunger of an entire family. For this reason, an illegal food market was formed, where people could obtain food at extortionate prices. This, however, was prohibited, and a person caught with more than their fair share of food was arrested. On the other hand, a curfew was established between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. This brought as a consequence the end of nightlife in big cities like Paris. No one could leave their home without a pass signed by the authorities, and households were required to lock their doors and windows. The lights had to be turned off for fear that they would be used to send messages to Allied aircraft. Many remember that the French capital was plunged into a gloomy silence. No laughter, cars or music could be heard. The mere sound of a police alarm or an airplane was enough to send the population into a panic. Despite the terrifying nature of the situation, the Wehrmacht took advantage of the fact that Paris was in their hands and used it as a tourist area for their troops. Many German units were rewarded with a season off in the capital, where they could visit its famous restaurants, theaters, and nightclubs. There was also an increase in prostitution, as Nazi soldiers frequently visited French brothels. As expected, the German occupation army encouraged the persecution of Jews, homosexuals, leftist militants, and trade unionists. Gallic citizens of Jewish roots were forced to embroider a yellow star on their clothes, so that they would be easily recognizable. Discriminatory measures were implemented, such as forcing them to get on the last car when using the Paris underground train. Many were sent to concentration camps like Auschwitz or Dachau, where they met their deaths. The SS patrolled the streets of France and made sure that all those deemed undesirable by the regime got what they deserved. On the other hand, hundreds of thousands of Frenchmen were used as slaves, and transferred to Germany as laborers in military industries. Those who rejected the Nazi dictatorship joined the resistance, which organized acts of sabotage against the invaders. The lives of those who fought for freedom, however, were fraught with danger, and the threat of death hung over their heads. Let us see the testimony of Giselle Guillemot, a member of the resistance who remembers what those terrible days were like. I was responsible for looking for supplies and important documents. To do this, together with my group, we organized raids on rural town halls. With my youthful appearance and schoolgirl outfit, no one suspected me. I was the ideal person for these missions. Even so, there were days when an uncontrollable anxiety invaded me. Seeing a man dressed in a trench coat would give me a panic attack. Hearing a suspicious noise in a stairwell made me believe that I would be arrested by the Gestapo and tortured. If I got caught, could I endure the torment without ratting out my comrades? That was my biggest fear. In June 1944, the Allies began the liberation of France, an operation in which the resistance played a leading role. In August of that same year, the German troops stationed in Paris surrendered, and the Gauls soon regained their autonomy. The leaders of the Vichy regime were prosecuted for treason, and Marshal Philippe Pétain was sentenced to life imprisonment. The true head of state, Prime Minister Pierre Laval, was sentenced to death and shot on October 15, 1945. Thus, France's darkest days came to an end. We reached the end of the video, and we want to ask you, if you had lived at that time, would you have joined the French resistance? Leave us your answer in the comment box below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.